Warm greetings from India on behalf of Chennai Center for China Studies and National Maritime Foundation Tamil Nadu chapter. We extend our good wishes to our distinguished panelists today and thank them for taking time out to be with us. The starting point of our today's discussion is China and its role in the Solomon Island. But the subsequent development has also showed us the level of entrenchment that China has made, thriving on the vulnerabilities in the domestic polity in the region, among several other factors. It can be starting from the Pacific Islands or the Indo-Pacific or countries like Sri Lanka, Maldives. Everywhere we find a destabilizing trend. So with our esteemed panel today from across globe, we will discuss on the security and developmental challenges faced by the parties and what can be done about it. Our special thanks and gratitude goes to Ms. Cleo Paskal, Senior Fellow, Foundation for Defense of Democracies, for stitching this together. She will also chair and moderate today's discussion. With these brief words, I now request Cleo to take over and conduct the proceedings. Over to you, Cleo.
Thank you very much. I'm incredibly grateful to C3S, NMF, and the Royal Oceania Institute for helping to pull this together, and to NSC Jennifer Anson for finding the time in an incredibly busy schedule. I've been looking forward to this panel and to learning from what these people who are on it have to say for a very long time. Individually, I've learned from them all enormously. They all play important roles in their own countries in terms of shaping, understanding foreign policy and in trying to protect against critical threats. We're dealing with a time of pan-Indo-Pacific challenges, geopolitical, economic, environmental, all made much worse by COVID. But we can see just in individual events how the linkages are across the region. You had the Wanwang 5 Chinese research vessel illegally entering Palau waters and from there go directly to Sri Lanka. You've seen Chinese political warfare in the Solomons and in the Maldives. And the problems are clearly linked and common. At the same time, we're seeing new innovations being set up. For example, Palau setting up its national security coordinator position. Palau just launched its first national security strategy. India's just launched its first indigenous aircraft carrier. Congratulations, India, very exciting. And we're starting to see much more activity, positive activity across the region, including a visit just this last week of the INS Satpura visiting Fiji. So in this panel, what we're hoping to do is look at some of these common challenges and try to find some common lessons learned and ways we can all work together better to understand and counter those challenges. Our first speaker, and again, I'm incredibly grateful to her for her time, is the National Security Coordinator of the Palau, the country of Palau, Jennifer Anson. Palau has a small population, but it's in a highly strategic location, and it's very innovative in terms of the ways that it's trying to reshape its economy and find employment for its youth and position itself in the 21st century. It's in free association with the United States, which means that the citizens of Palau can go and work in the U.S., and the U.S. is supposed to be responsible for its defense and security. But there is a lot more that can be done, perhaps, in that relationship. And so Jennifer Anson will tell us a little bit about the situation in Palau and some of the things that her office has been doing. After that, we'll speak with Commodore R.S. Vasan, who everybody here knows. He's the former regional commander, Coast Guard Regional East of the Indian Navy, and he's currently the director of the Chennai Center for China Studies and regional director for the National Maritime Foundation in Tamil Nadu. After him, we'll speak with Mr. Tevita Motulalo, who is with the Royal Oceania Institute, the think tank in the Kingdom of Tonga. It's a very interesting think tank, quite innovative as well. I had the pleasure of working with the Royal Oceania Institute on a Chatham House project looking at perceptions of strategic shifts in the Indo-Pacific, and their research was exemplary and very enlightening. He received his MSc in Geopolitics and International Relations from Manipal in India and was a senior researcher at Gateway House in Mumbai, as well as a Pacific Island Society security scholar. And our final speaker will be Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha. During his long and distinguished service spanning over 38 years, he served in a variety of command, staff, and instructional appointments. He's a qualified flying instructor who has over 2,700 hours of flying on 18 different types of aircraft. The majority of his flying has been on the Sea Harrier from aircraft carriers. He served as the flag officer commanding the Western Fleet, and he was Chief of Integrated Defense Staff and Flag Officer Commanding-in-Chief of Western Naval Command. That is our astounding lineup for today. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, who will speak for about 10 to 15 minutes. This is Jen Anson. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Cleo. Can you all hear me? Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Anson. I'm from the Republic of Palau, and my role is the National Security Coordinator for the Republic of Palau. And this position is a fairly new position. The office was just created last year in March. The office was created through a presidential executive order. Last year, we had transitioned into a new administration. We have the same cycle, I guess, as the United States. Every 4 years, we have national elections in November, and we inaugurate a new administration the following January. So in January of 2021, we started this new administration with our current president, Surangwips Jr., and in March of last year, he created this office through presidential executive order. So going back a little bit, the office had been discussed and brought up several times over several years in close consultation with the United States at our annual joint committee meetings. For those who are not so aware of our relationship with the United States, the Republic of Palau has a compact of free association with the United States. And this compact went into effect in 1994. And one of the articles in this compact talks about defense and security, and the United States is responsible for the defense and security of the Republic of Palau. There are two other countries that have this special relationship with the United States, and that's the Federated States of Micronesia and the Republic of the Marshall Islands. So the three of us are what are referred to as the freely associated states. So we have free association with the United States. We have some, benefits where we can travel back and forth to the U.S. without having to get visas. We can live and work in the United States. U.S. citizens can travel freely to Palau and live and work here as well. And a big component of the compact is funding. So the United States funds a lot of programs and provides annual funding. And Palau, in turn, we allow the United States military to come to Palau and conduct exercises. And the United States does have several defense sites here in the Republic that they can use for whatever military purposes that they desire. And our compact is currently being renegotiated, the financial aspect, and the compact is valid up until 2044. So in 2044, we will sit at the table again and see if we want to continue or we want to end the compact. That's up to the negotiating team. So back to the office creation. So during our meetings with the United States, it was brought up that there needs to be a part of the Palau government that can communicate directly with the U.S. Department of Defense specifically to discuss military activities, exercises, training, subject matter, expert exchanges, what have you. And in my previous role, I was working at the Ministry of Justice as the anti-human trafficking coordinator or director. And one of my side jobs in the ministry was also working with the U.S. military, helping to coordinate exercises and training. So I sort of just transitioned into this role because I had already sort of been doing it unofficially. So now I'm doing it officially. So one of the responsibilities of this office is to coordinate all military activities, trainings, exercises, not just with the United States, but with any foreign government that wants to come and conduct such exercises or activities or visits here. In addition to coordinating the activities of Palau's law enforcement agencies, receiving and sharing intelligence from our law enforcement partners, also providing weekly presidential briefs on security to our president and to other officials, and pretty much just working with other countries, other agencies that have anything to do with security in the region and internationally. So that's sort of a background on my office and what I do. Currently, I have one staff. He's an intelligence analyst, and I'm looking forward to hiring more staff and building up the capacity of this office to be able to do what is mandated in the executive order, including drafting and implementing a national security strategy for Palau, which was released this past June. And so we are trying to share that security strategy with our partners and our friends in the region and throughout the world, to share what our security concerns are and to solicit support for achieving the goals that are set forth in our national security strategy.
Thank you very much. If I can just ask just a quick follow-up, would you like to describe some of the issues that were brought up in the national security strategy? I think it's useful to get a sense of the complexity of the challenges facing Palau.
Yeah, so over the last several years, we had three main security challenges: maritime security, climate change, and transnational crime. And as we were drafting the security strategy, we were struggling through the pandemic, and we had just got onto a new fiber optic cable. So two other concerns that popped up were economic security and cyber security, just in the past year or so during the pandemic. So those are our number one priority at the moment is economic security. We're trying to come out of the pandemic. We've dug ourselves very deep into debt because we have taken out a lot of loans to keep ourselves above water, especially during the pandemic. Because of our rating or World Bank rating or whatever scale they use, we were no longer considered a least developing country. So we were not eligible for grants, and therefore we were only eligible for loans. So we have taken out a lot of loans, and we continue to take out loans to keep our government running. And this is a question for, do you also monitor influence operations mounted by China in your country and other Pacific islands? Yes, yes. So we do monitor. My office works very closely with our Ministry of Justice, my former office, monitoring movements of individuals coming in. We work closely with the Attorney General's office, who receives applications for corporations, new corporations. So we monitor new investors who want to come in and establish themselves here. A lot of the Chinese investors that come here are looking to build hotels and resorts and casinos, getting into that kind of business. So yes, we do. And then we also monitor our EEZ, the ships that come into Palau, and the ships that transit, and the ships and other vessels that are up to no good. We do monitor. A lot of times we reach out to the United States for support because we just don't have the capacity or the capability that they do. And we work closely with the Joint Region Marianas office out of Guam. And that is the office that oversees the U.S. military activities in this region. So we reach out to them quite often for assistance with maritime surveillance. And there's another question. How have you been able to stand up to China, which is using all means to control a small independent country? Tourism from China apparently hit badly. Yes, it did hit badly. Back in 2015, we had an influx of Chinese tourism. All the hotels were full and restaurants were full, and all the tour companies were fully booked, and things were going well, so it seemed on the surface. However, and this is what I try to tell people that say, you know, things were going well. Things were going well for the Chinese, because the tourists that would come would come in on Chinese chartered flights. They would get on Chinese buses and go to Chinese hotels, go eat at Chinese restaurants, go do tours with Chinese tour companies. So really all that money from tourism was just going back to China. But anyway, so we had the influx of Chinese tourism in 2015. And then the pressure was on for Palau to switch diplomatic ties from Taiwan to China. And when we didn't, China said, okay, we're going to, ban all our tourists from going to Palau. So Palau was really like wiped off of any media outlets, tourism outlets in China. So, and then the flight stopped and there were no more Chinese tourists. But what came along with the tourism influx was the investors who came, who leased out buildings and land. And then when that stopped, guess what? The land and the buildings are still under leases, some of them 50 years, some of them 99 years, that we can't do anything about because they've already been leased out to Chinese who will probably never come back in our lifetime. So there are a lot of abandoned buildings and a lot of land lots that have been abandoned that we can't do anything about. So yes, that's in terms of external debt.
I think the next question is about Tonga, so we'll get to it when Dr. Motulalo speaks. Vasan, that was very helpful. I'm sure there are going to be a lot more questions in the Q&A, and I'd just like to recognize this issue of Palau having diplomatic relations with Taiwan. This is something a lot of countries are now talking about, Taiwan and how it needs to be supported. Palau has put itself on the front line of this and stood by its principles on its relationship with Taiwan. And we owe you gratitude for that. I know it's cost the country a lot, and the temptation to switch has been, I'm sure, enormous in certain sectors. So thank you very much for that. We'll come back to you in the Q&A, and now we'll go over to Commodore Vasan, who I think will talk to us about what's going on a little bit in the islands of the Indian Ocean island countries. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Cleo. We are grateful to Cleo and all the participants for being with us this morning. Let me also extend a warm Onam greetings to all of you. It's a major festival in Kerala, and you will see that a lot of these people are now going to miss on this program, but they will definitely look at the recording tomorrow, day after. So, when we started working on this program, it was important to look at not just the islands in Pacific, but also in the islands in the Indian Ocean region. So I'm thankful to Cleo for accepting the suggestion that we also expand the scope of discussions to identify some of the common threads that are there. So in my 10 minutes, 12 minutes or so, I would like to concentrate on identifying what are the common issues, challenges faced by small countries, which are independent countries, which you find it very difficult to be part of either camp, and therefore get drawn into the power play dynamics. So, which is what we have witnessed in Pacific. Palau is a specific example, a small country. In fact, in India, a lot of us are very appreciative of what Palau has done, because for a small country to stand up to a bully, China, was not easy. And it's not going to be easy again in the future, because particularly when she brings out the fact that some of these buildings are leased for 50 years or 90 years, how do we go about it legally? That's another question which I'm sure Palau administrators and elected representatives will be looking at. It's happened like a Hampantota. Closer home, it's some say it's 99 years, some say it's 120 years. The point is that there are successive generations who will not even know that this land belongs to them. Or if it belongs to them, it's been given away to write off the debts or whatever. Bala, the first slide, please. Bala, are you there? The first slide, just to get an orientation of this, not that you people are not aware, but geography is always important. Geographic locations are what drives decisions and policy making. So I thought I'll just show it to you. Bala is just putting it up for you. There's just 2 slides. The idea was to capture the geographic challenges, the geostrategic compulsions which are there in smaller countries. Bala, you got off. Are you there? I can't see the slide. Okay, just open it. Expand it, that's all. So, in any case, all of us are aware that the definition of Indo-Pacific itself, as far as India is concerned, encompasses the entire area from east coast of Africa to Australia and beyond, covering half of the Pacific. But there are other definitions which I will not go into. So when you look at this, why do these islands become important? Bala, just go to the next slide, please. Yeah, just expand it. So, when you look at this, you realize that there are such strategic positions, locations, which oversee the sea lanes of communication. Predominantly something like 65,000 ships transit through the Indian Ocean region. And most of them are going through one of these choke points which are here. So, which is where the big powers which are there would always like to have a say in the affairs of the island and dominate them if required by, giving them extended loans, like it happened in Sri Lanka, like it happened in Maldives till the new government came here, or in the case of Djibouti and others, where there is perhaps a legitimate interest of China to protect their own trade and commerce, particularly along the African coast. And this became acute during the piracy attacks along the Somalia coast, and which is when they realized that the distances are something that they need to overcome. The challenges of distance and the Straits of Malacca dilemma, which we keep talking about, which is when they started looking at bases. So, when they started looking at Hambantota, which is at the southern tip, it was all about having a foothold in the Indian Ocean region. So it's very clear, because if you have to exit from the South China Sea through the Straits of Malacca, then move on to Africa, you need somewhere to fuel up, you need somewhere to turn around, you need somewhere to rest and refresh, what we in the Navy call as R&R, rest and recreation. So for all this, they require bases. So if it's owned by somebody else, they would look at how they can take it on this so-called debt or the checkbook diplomacy, which is what happened in the case of Sri Lanka. So what you need to understand is that there are geostrategic compulsions of why big powers or extra-regional powers want foothold in areas of importance, which is where the trust of China in acquiring Hambantota, operating from Gwadar, operating from Bangladesh, Myanmar, in the guise of the Maritime Silk Road, where a lot of investments are taking place. But these investments are not free. Even the interest rates are very high. There's a phenomenal amount of analysis that's gone into, in comparison with IMF, how does China's investments work? China's investments work, unfortunately, have not worked in favor of the island residents. Whether it's Hambantota, whether it is Colombo Port City, or whether it's some of the schemes earlier in the previous government in Maldives, all these were something which favored the Chinese. It was, like the previous speaker brought out, it was win-win for China. They came and they conquered. So, which is where we need to be very careful about the strategy adopted by China. So, 2013 onwards, they've been investing in the BRI or the Maritime Silk Road. And obviously, it was to capture markets abroad, on one hand, because of the surplus money that they had, which was $3.2 trillion. On the second hand, to get a foothold through investments. All of us are very familiar with the statement, flag follows trade. This is what they've done. So, many of these countries are not in a position to stand up to the big power, which is China, nor do much about the kind of power play which is there. And some of the solutions had to come from within, like perhaps Palau has adopted, or even Maldives. At one time when the previous regime in Maldives was, I'm sure Shekhar will talk about it, were totally favorable to China, and Indian companies were displaced. They were booted out when they had their foot well set in infrastructural development in Maldives. Likewise, in Sri Lanka, when the Rajapaksa government came in, they were gung-ho with the Chinese investments, and there are a lot of policy failures which has taken Sri Lanka down this line. You saw the kind of crisis that were there, and the only thing that helped them was the kind of goodwill from India, which supplied fertilizers, which supplied waters to India, which was the first respondent when tsunami occurred in 2004 and subsequently. So, you can't change geography. So the smaller island nations which are there are quite conscious that, while there may be an extra-regional power like China which would come in, ultimately you need to look at countries like India which have a benevolent nature of engagement. This for the island nations and for even the landline neighbors comes in the form of sagar, security and growth for all in the region. This is a mantra that we have adopted, and we walk the talk. It's not that you just keep it as a slogan. Just 2 days ago there was another conference which was conducted by ICWA, and I was very happy to hear a scholar from Madagascar, who gave me a name from Madagascar, which sounded similar to our aspirations of Sagar and Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. World is one family. So if you're in one family, you help each other in times of distress. You go all out. You pull out all stops. So which is what India is trying to do. So whether it was water supplies to Maldives, whether it is a clearing of the Galle Harbour post 2004 in 24 hours, or being there when the people needed us because of cultural historical relations, and also the benign nature of India, which has accepted refugees from all over without having signed the Refugee Convention, which is a different matter. But the point is, even having not signed the Refugee Convention, we've done everything that we can for Sri Lankan refugees, for Bangladesh refugees, for people from different parts of the world. So this is what we need to understand, is to say that when we are trying to do all this, obviously without expectation, Bala and others here are well aware of what is prescribed in the Bhagavad Gita, which we rever. It is doing something without expectations. So obviously here what we are trying to do is to give all this and not really expecting much in return. But Seychelles, Mauritius, just also, though it is not the main topic of discussion, Seychelles, Mauritius, Madagascar, all these are in the Maritime Domain Awareness Program of India, which is a major program for ensuring there is safety, security, and stability at sea. So India has by and large been recognized as the first responder in case of natural disasters, or even in case of other turmoils which take place. And also it has a wonderful Coast Guard, which is looking at pollution control, which is monitoring the seas around us. And all this has enabled India to not only be the first responder, but also recognized as a net security facilitator. I'm not quite fond of using the word net security facilitator as opposed to net security provider, because net security provider is something that requires a larger fleet and greater commitments around the world. So we must say are quite happy to be able to provide the kind of help that is required, monetary help or technological help, which is happening through the ITEX, happening through the preparations are happening through those people, through the Colombo Security Dialogue. So what we would like to do is to ensure that our traditionally acknowledged backyard is free of interference. So from here, it is where the Sri Lanka's reinventing of Indian Ocean region as a zone of peace is of great relevance. There are extra-regional players, and they'll continue to be here. They are here to protect their interests, whether it is block security or energy security or their future ambitions to be number one. So this is how it will happen. This is how it will pan out in the Pacific Island. It has already panned out, and we witnessed this. So the questions for us as a major Indian Ocean region power is, what can we do about this? But this is important. Now, we shouldn't be only looking at the challenges, but also try and offer some solutions. Sagar definitely is a great initiative. Likewise, the blue economy initiatives of our neighbors, which are supported by us through technology means and others, is another great initiative. So there India can offer a lot in terms of nuclear technology, in terms of satellite technology, in terms of services which are there. So in all this, we are in a position to extend a helping hand, and that would be the way to engage with smaller countries who are looking to stand on their own feet. So our job it is collectively to help them to stand on their own feet. So which is where there is a importance of the Quad. Quad, as every partner has clearly said, it's not a military alliance. But I'm happy that it's panned out to different areas of science and technology, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Or for that matter, the IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, which is clearly spelled out what it will do. Even its earmarked money, something like $50,000 billion or whatever. So all these are instruments that are available for ensuring that the kind of predatory engagement which China indulges in is contained. So you can't do it on your own. In fact, India, or for that matter, many of the other countries, barring USA, does not have the deep pockets that China has, which is where there is a challenge. So if Sri Lanka wants money, who is going to give it? So the recommendation here is that the IPEF or even get Japan on board, who's investing in Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, get more partners, get the European Union on board, let them have a common fund, which will provide something which is competitive, which does not demand something in return in terms of a long lease of 100 years, and take away property of countries like was brought out by the spokesperson from Palau, Jennifer, to say that they'll come there, they'll use everything in the book and outside the book to see that you are subjected to these kind of stresses. Hambantota was given, I think, something like $8 billion was pending, and that is the money that was could not be returned. So with the regime change, they went to China and they tried to negotiate the terms. Even this case of the YW5, which came into China, initially while they requested the visit to be deferred, but they could not contain this for longer than what it happened. It was here on the celebration of the 75th anniversary of India. And the combined backdoor efforts, both by US and India, could not keep this under. It tells you the kind of stronghold that China has in small countries, which it is acquired through the promise of greater investments, and which has not given much. I'm personally aware, I've been visiting Sri Lanka quite often, and the complaint there is that they only get menial jobs. Shiploads of people come there, technicians come from there, the equipment come from there. It's part of the contract to say that the equipment must be bought from China. So if they are giving you $100 billion, $80 billion goes back to China. So this is the template with Chinese characteristics, if I may use the word, and that's what is going on throughout the world. So how do we combat this? This can only be done if we have a common pool. People are investing in different areas, whether it's AAGC or INSTC or in IPF. No, they need to put money where mouth is and have a bigger kitty, which is perhaps complements what IMF can do. IMF has shown a lot of restrictions and all that, but this could be something which can be given to these people. The other thing is to engage on a people-to-people contact. This is something which India has done in the past, and that's another recommendation to say that we needed to talk to them, keep talking to them to understand mutual concerns and address them together. Instead of harboring suspicions, because that's something which happened in Maldives. The people in Maldives were led to believe that India is there to take over Maldives virtually. Even when there was a regime change, which happened on its own, prior to that, a lot of people were saying, why is India not intervening militarily? India's stated objective is not to intervene militarily. The only time it happened was in Bangladesh when we were stuck with 20 million refugees. So, I think in a democratic country where there are a lot of questions are asked routinely, it's very clear as to what India would like to do. It should like to build up its capacities and capabilities for the benefit of not only its own people, but also for the neighbors. So even when Sri Lanka had this chemical carrier which sank not far from Sri Lanka, it was the Indian Coast Guard which was there. So Indian Coast Guard today has that kind of capability and capacity. The Indian Navy has the complete capacity today to sail the four oceans to help our neighbors, not to militarily take over. This is the point that we need to solve. No, and as far as the common security challenges that are concerned, which are not spoken about earlier, it's very clear. I'm not going to repeat again and again because everyone is clear about the non-traditional threats. So during the peacetime, it's a non-traditional threats, whether it is IUU, that's illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing, or MARPOL provisions, that's marine pollution provisions, where ships are indiscriminately dumping oil, plastic, and those kind of things in other seas, or whether it is related to the piracy threats which we have witnessed along the piracy. There is a need for countries' navies to come together and contain it. It happened off Somalia when it raised between 2005 and 2009. But when the international bodies came together, the navies came together in the form of CMF, was a combined maritime force, and India, China, everyone was chilling. There were 17 navies at one time who were trying to protect trade interests and the slot energy security which is there. So this by and large identifies the threats that are faced by smaller nations, which are looking to expand. It is natural for them to grow. And we as democracies need to come together to ensure that their aspirations are met by providing the wherewithal in terms of manpower, technical skill power, in terms of service sector help, which is required by Tonga and others. This is where India has a certain amount of advantage. We may not have the largest military. And even for China, having the mere numbers of 380 odd ships doesn't mean much. Because why are they interested in Palau? Why are they interested in Solomon Islands? It's very simple. They traditionally have been wanting to move away from the shackles of first and second defense lines. So they would like to expand this. They must have bases closer to Australia, closer to other areas of interest, and which is what they are working to a plan. So all these leases which are there, Ms. Jennifer, there may not be good news there. They may suddenly find that the leased land may have a headquarters of PLA Navy, which is right there. I'm not sure if you can do much about it. So that is the danger that is there. So as long as there is greater awareness amongst the island nations on the nature of influence operations, so influence operations is a major thing. We've had many discussions on this, and it's mind-boggling as to the extent to which the Chinese machinery with special characteristics can go to sort of create and cultivate audiences and stakeholders in the target country, including in India. We have not been spared. They work through political parties, they work through the media, they work through think tanks, and there is deep sort of inroads that they made in all these areas, and and they use the same advantages that democracy has. So this is another point that we need to understand. The free media, the open debate, taking to the streets protesting against something. In fact, there have been reports to say that China was instrumental in triggering some of these protests in Bangalore. When the Foxconn industry wanted to make iPhones and others. So obviously they will use everything that is of advantage. I cannot see us doing the same thing in China. We do not have the ability, nor do the system allow us. So these are some of the broad-natured issues that I wanted to flag to understand where there's a common thread between the islands of the Pacific and also the islands of Indian Ocean, where we need to work together. India cannot do it alone. This is another fact that we must be conscious of. We need to be able to do together, and therefore have formats, tweak IPAF, tweak the economic, the resources which can be pulled together, and make it public. Make it public and say, this we would like to help you out, the islands in Pacific and Indian Ocean, to ensure that the region remains a zone of peace. That is Indian Ocean. It's a tall order with increasing nature of power play that's taking place between USA, China, and the different blocks which are there. But that is the way forward, is to help people achieve their aspirational goals without them being subjected to the kind of scenarios that Palau has faced with, or Sri Lanka has faced with, or Maldives faced with till the last changeover. So I thought that was in a nutshell a broad canvas of how I looked at the common threads and the way in which we perhaps can meet these challenges together. We have to join hands, and only then can we take on this challenge that's emerging in our backyard. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, Commodore, for that spectacular overview of the challenges and the potential solutions, and for showing how clearly the challenges are interlinked. Indeed, if China feels like it needs to get through or past Palau, the destination then brings it into the Indian Ocean is quite soon afterwards. So the security of the Pacific Island countries is intrinsically linked to the security in the Indian Ocean, which is, of course, of primary concern to India. As you mentioned, if something happens in the Solomons that threatens Australia, and as you mentioned, if the Quad is part of the solution and Australia becomes isolated or Japan becomes threatened, that again affects Indian security. So I think your discourse gave a very clear insight into how interlinked all of this is, and how important it is for this discussion to be taking place between the Pacific Islands and India. The challenges are common, and if one fails, everybody is weaker for it and in more danger. And somebody who's been looking at this topic for a very long time is our next speaker, Mr. Tevita Motulalo, who actually, I think 10 years ago, wrote a paper for Gateway House on the strategic imperatives of India in the Pacific Islands. So I'm going to turn it over to him with gratitude for his work on this topic to tell us a little bit more about his thoughts on the issue. Oh, can't hear you, sir.
Can you please unmute yourself? We are unable to hear you. You're unmuted, but still we are unable to hear you. Not able to hear you.
Maybe we can go to the next speaker while he puts his system together.
Admiral is here. He has already joined. So,
Mr. Motulalo, we're gonna give you a few minutes to sort it out, and in the interim, we'll go over to Vice Admiral Sinha, who has deep, extensive experience on these issues, and we're extremely grateful for his time. Over to you, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, thank you, Cleo. Thank you very much. And sorry, everyone, that I was a little late to join. But first thing is to say, Vanakkam, my guru is here, Commodore Vasan. I've been his student and a younger friend for a very, very long time, 4 or 5 decades now, I think. I heard him, it's absolutely right, because there is no way out. But I just want to point out a few things, giving the example of Maldives as to how similar it is to the Pacific Islands, which is happening right now. And ignore any of these linkages, and you'll find that you'll land up in a bigger problem, which will take much longer to solve than what it takes now. Why I'm saying this, the example of Maldives is a very classic example as to how democracies, take such a long time to react to something which is visible, react to something which has historically been proven, and people have got into trouble. But yet, we hope that the democracy will take charge and democracies don't fail, without realizing that in a country like Maldives, where the democracy was very nascent. It had just been formed after 30 years of dictatorship of President Gayub. And, first election, and Mohammad Nasheed, he became the president. He took a little bit of time to settle down, but then he thought, he tasted the power, and then he realized that, India is, too slow to react to their requirements, and he fell in the hands of the Chinese. Just see and it's not that Chinese had come only after Nasheed, came to power. Chinese have been looking at this island not from now. It goes back to Tang dynasty in the 7th, 8th century. The Admiral here, he has paid a visit 2-3 times, at least twice for sure. And not only that, the king of Maldives, he used to pay obeisance to the Tang dynasty king. I am talking about 650, 670 AD, thereabouts. So, this is a habit of China, and we need to keep that in mind, that nothing has changed. It may be Communist Party, but the Chinese always fall back to history. Now, the telltale signs that we had, to which we didn't react really, we didn't react sufficiently, and now it has become a 4 countries consortium to take care of or take charge of the Chinese, both in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, Indo-Pacific, and I think there is a good reason for it to be called Indo-Pacific. The first sign that we got was, the Chinese opened the embassy in Malé in 2011. The moment that happened, we sounded the government and we said that it's not a very good news, because we knew that Chinese were doing some activity or the other, even in President Gayoom's time. When the election, I'm giving you the first-hand information, and it's all what I have witnessed and party to it in the sense to apprise the government. When Nasheed became the president, till then he was a man of Gayoom. That is how he became president. Nobody becomes president in Maldives without Gayoom's approval. But after some time, President Nasheed started sort of distancing himself from Gayoom. So Gayoom decided to make sure that he is thrown out. And the coup which took place is not because it was a street demonstration, etc., etc. Commodore Vasan also mentioned that some street demonstrations in Bangalore and here and there has been funded by the Chinese. Absolutely right. Now you will see that the intelligence agencies are now digging into this big minefield, and they are finding the Chinese linkages everywhere, wherever it's money. So Nasheed was actually removed by a proper design of the Chinese and President Gayoom at that time, ex-President Gayoom. Why did the Chinese get upset? Mainly because they found that Nasheed is not going to play ball with them for very long. The last decision that he took, that was because it was compelled by the Chinese. The GMR was evicted out of the Malé airfield, who were actually working, doing the infrastructure development, and it was given to a Chinese company. Once again, it's not that intelligence agencies did know, and the ground was so flimsy that there is something called a development fund, which the GMR was not charging from the passengers who were traveling to Malé on a tour. And therefore, they said we have had a loss of $500 million. Even at that time, 2011-12, we suggested to the government that $500 million for a country like India is not a big money. You say that, okay, fine, we will pay it in 5 installments and give the contract to Airport Authority of India. It's a government organization if the GMR is not functioning. But that didn't happen. In democracy, these things happen that we tend to ignore, and we hope. It was hoped that the democracy in Maldives will actually take care of these things, and they will understand the ramification, the future ramification. That didn't happen. Now, the second opportunity that we had was when Wahid, who was the unelected vice president, he became the officiating president. We paid a visit. Our defense minister, defense secretary, and some of us went and met him just to tell him that, look, don't do anything which India is not happy with, and must have the elections very quickly. In fact, before that, the suggestion was that we can put Mr. Nasheed back because he was, ousted in a coup, and Wahid was not very happy to continue as president. But our government was not in a mood to accept that kind of change around. They said, no, election is the best thing. So election was rigged. Why I say rigged, I'll just come to that. Mr. Gayoom, he had very close equation with the Sri Lankan government. And there are about 6,000 non-resident Maldivians who live in Sri Lanka, and they have the voting rights. Mr. Gayoom flew down to Singapore, and from there he was controlling this entire election. And the Chinese were funding these people who are sitting in Sri Lanka, the Maldivians who were in Sri Lanka. And all this was done completely with the sort of cahoot with the government in Sri Lanka those days. And ultimately, what happened that Yamin, who was supposed to have lost the election, to the office of the president, he won. Why he won? That is because we were very convinced that the democracy in Maldives has matured and they will get Mr. Nasheed back. But that didn't happen. And when it was brought to the notice that, look, these are the 6,000 people who are going to vote against him. But the feeling in New Delhi was that no, they are all people of Nasheed and they will very much be voting for him. And though we had all the sort of linkages to how the money was paid to these 7,000 people in Sri Lanka, the Maldivians, and how they were supposed to change sides on the day of voting. So finally, he lost. But subsequent to that, we have really kept our eyes closed. We haven't kept our eyes closed. We haven't acted. We had a visit moment this happened, Nasheed was thrown out, there was an immediate visit by a very high-ranking the CPC official from the Politburo. He went and met the Mr. Wahid, and that started ringing alarm bells. So some of us went and paid a visit when we met him to just give him a little bit of caution that, look, you can't do anything in our backyard. It's your security is very much linked to our own security, just like Commodore Vasan mentioned about the neighborhood. Yeah, it is true, but we didn't react. We just didn't react. We had a visit by the CPC gentleman. We had a visit by the chief of PLA Army. We had a visit by another high-ranking guy, and ultimately we had visit by the Prime Minister, followed by Xi Jinping. A president of Chinese or the General Secretary of Chinese Communist Party does not go to an island country like this unless there is something more happening. By this time, Yamin was already sort of playing into their hands. He has been paid a lot of money outside Maldives, for which the case is still going on, as you know. And he was let out from the jail by the Supreme Court. Once again, there is a big story about, there's a big reason for it. Thereafter, once Mr. Nasheed came to power, he got an act passed in the parliament of Maldives. And mind you, the parliament was not full house that day. An act can only be enacted in a parliament when you have 2/3 of majority. That didn't happen because the parliament everybody was not, very short notice was given. And this act said that any island can be sold, forever to any country who wishes to spend about $1 billion in the government's coffers, with the commitment that you will increase the area of that island by reclamation almost 70%. So it was tailor-made for China because they had already done this in South China Sea, reclamation of land. And this is one thing which I want to caution. We got a lot of scholars here from learned people who are into Pacific. I am not so much into Pacific. But Cleo is here, and I think Jennifer also, and we got Honorable NSA, I think, from Palau, if I'm not wrong. So anytime they want to do infrastructure work or they want to do increasing the area of your island, just be very careful that you're heading for a death trap. So here, in this time frame, in fact, our reaction should have been that $1 billion once again was not very much for India. They should have just gone and bought an island which was closest to India, where the Chinese were eyeing. They want to make an airfield, they want to put a radar, and the entire aerial activity of Southern Peninsula, would be in their sort of, surveillance. So it was a very serious matter. But we hope that the democracy will take charge and nothing will happen. I must give it that, the foreign secretary at that time, who's our minister now, he flew down and he went and, told them their concerns. So finally that act was repealed. But in 2017, the act was brought into force, and 2019, the act was repealed. In these 2 years, the Chinese have bought, now this is not really reported in many places. They own 17 islands out of that 1,100 islands with the Maldivians have, and which Maldives has. Out of those, few are very close to Gan Island, which is in the southern side, and some of them are on the northern side, and one such island is Hanimadu, which has got an international airport. And again, Hanimadu and Minicoy are about 120 or 140 or 164 kilometers apart. We have a common sort of EEZ, that equidistant EEZ patrolling goes on even now. But, we knew that is going out of hand. And fortunately, we reacted, and some of the contract has been, not all, but some part of the contract has been sort of removed from the Chinese, and it has come to India. But what I'm saying is that, we know what is happening, and yet we believe so much as to this won't happen to us. Today, the Maldivians have a debt of roughly, it is $3.1 billion, and which is about 50% of their, more than 50% of their GDP. The Chinese ambassador has recently made a statement that, the calculation of the Maldivians is not right. Mr. Nasheed is not giving you the right figure. It is about some $1.4, $1.5 billion. If that be so, they can still be bailed out. But what happens to those 17 islands which they have taken possession of? They have made number of resorts. They have made, the friendship bridge, as they call it, from the airport in Malé to the city. That is about, I think, 2.5 kilometers or something like that, which they have built. 2-3 islands, the entire island is in their control. The resorts are, owned by Chinese. And tomorrow, one more incident which should have alarmed the government. In 2013-14, you must have seen that, there was a lot of hue and cry that the nuclear submarine of the Chinese are floating around in the Indian Ocean. It is true. What has happened is that, these ocean research vessels, that's another thing to be watching out. And I find that, these ocean research vessels have been moving about in the Pacific very frequently, very close to the islands. This is a danger sign, the one which came to Sri Lanka, Hambantota, very recently. The first time that it came, 2013 end, December. Initially, it was in the Bay of Bengal. We chased him out. He came and anchored himself very close to Malé. And we were tracking him all the time. So much so that, we took some aerial photography, and later on, when we analyzed those photographs, it was having all the conformal antenna of satellite communication, and the antennas were pointing in a direction where the Chinese communication satellite had recently been placed in the Indian Ocean, primarily over Arabian Sea. After that, we in fact warned the government. We mentioned to the government that this is something which is going to happen. We put two things together, and we realized that, our Vikramaditya, the aircraft carrier, was coming from Murmansk on its maiden visit, and she was expected to arrive in first week of January. And therefore, obviously, it was transiting through the Red Sea and coming out into Gulf of Aden and Arabian Sea. And one of the reasons that the ship was there to note the acoustic data of the propellers of this ship and use it later on to devise anti-submarine weapons. And when we came to know about the nuclear submarine being in the area, we came to know the time that he crossed from Mumbai Vatar down from Indonesia. We were sort of generally aware, and we were on and off, we were tracking. Then it occurred to us that maybe the nuclear submarine has got a satellite communication, but it cannot use it because it has to be on the surface, or maybe it has to be snorting. And therefore, it is possible that the messages from these nuclear submarines are being cleared to this ocean research vessel, who in turn is passing it down to Beijing or wherever the maritime headquarters is, which was at that time it was in Beijing. So we had him. We knew all this while, but we had taken sufficient measures well in time so that the Vikramaditya didn't come anywhere close to this submarine. So these are the telltale signs which will tell you that the Chinese are not going to go away. Even with the present government, Wang Yi has already made a visit to Malé at a very short notice, and he has promised that there will be 4 or 5 other projects which they want to take over, and some of these are some 5-star luxury hotels in Kafu and Gafu, those islands, housing projects in some more housing projects in Malé and Hulu Malé. Then you got the Fahala Island Development Project, expansion of the Velana International Airport. Now, these are some of it which has already started by them, but the government has put a stop to it after Mr. Soli came to power. But whatever is a contractual obligation, it will be very difficult for Mr. Soli to walk out of this. He can pay off, but the one which the work has commenced, it will be very difficult to stop it, and that's exactly what the Chinese are going to do. And if this loan is not returned, Maldives is heading the same way as Sri Lanka. So, I would say that our think tank, at least, we should make noise more often, saying that these loans, what is the extent of loan? Only probably Mr. Nasheed knows it fully, because that entire file is with him. And he's not revealing how much actually money, but he keeps telling in all forums that we meet that this guy has sold, we have given so many islands to them, etc., etc. So there is a lot of truth in what he's saying, because he's got a grievance, he's got vengeance. So I think that we should not look at even small things done by the Chinese in any of the islands as a friend, as a friendship. Please beware that it has got a long-term implication of your country getting into some very bigger debt trap. So I will just stop here, because the story is non-ending and it is still going on. A lot of it, the remedy, Commodore Vasan has already mentioned. You cannot do it alone. There is no doubt about it. Because the Chinese have deep pockets and they have penetrated for too long. We have all democracies have woken up very, very late. Democracy is fine, but you have to take some action in some. I am glad that the Quad has moved faster than I thought it will. In 1 year from where to where, but then it has to move even quicker than this. I don't know what is the problem in linking the Malabar countries to give the Quad a little bit of more teeth. I am glad that the Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness has been added to Quad, and right now it is only to make sure that there's no illegal and unreported fishing. But mind you, for a radar, for a satellite, a contact is a contact. So you will also know where the ships are. Not only if you can track a fishing boat, you can also track a ship. So it should form the basis, or should provide the canvas for making a security architecture to the Quad in the coming days. And that should happen. That must happen quickly. At least let it be a deterrence. Even if you don't do much on ground, at least you declare that we have added Malabar, and we will use if you have an IPMDA, how good it is if we know there is a ship which is breaking law. You must have the mechanism to chase him away. You must have mechanism to enforce the law. And for that, this IPMDA is an ideal thing. We should work on this and immediately connect Malabar countries okay, on a plug and play basis. When we need, we will deploy them. Even if you say that this is good enough, at least it will, deter the Chinese from doing something nasty. So I'll stop here because I've spoken for a very long time, but I'm here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was incredibly enlightening and helpful overview of the situation in the Maldives, the continuing issue in the Maldives, and some of the lost opportunities, which if they become lessons learned, maybe we can do something about it next time. But I suspect Ms. Anson found a lot of what was being said quite familiar in terms of methods of operation, and I know that there are things to learn from each other, and perhaps in the Q&A we could talk a bit about how to handle this research vessel issue, the Chinese ships that are floating around. But now we're going to try to go over to Mr. Motulalo. Do you want to see if your audio works?
Can you hear me now? Oh, great. Oh, so that works.
Yeah, loud and
so
clear.
I didn't have to call on the phone. Okay. Yes, thank you, Cleo, and the rest of the panelists, and greetings. And I know you're interested about this other part of the Pacific. My hand out to my fellow colleagues from the other side, from Palau. Hello. Yes, from Tonga, and the reference earlier, Cleo, about writing a paper for Gateway House on India-Pacific relations, especially focusing on Tonga, Fiji area. It came out of a wider inquiry into, and I was in India from 2011 until late 2013, and I was at Manipal, and we were doing exercises and war games and all that, trying to see what upcoming challenges are, considering all this talk about the Asia century and the Pacific century and the changing of the guards. So trying to see from the outset, and this is 10 years ago, what would be there to take care of before they materialize and cause further problems down the road. And part of that is looking at how China was behaving at the time. And China was already stringing along its string of pearls strategy, known to some people, and also making moves in the South China Sea, intimidating other ships and ramming into other vessels, even warships from the US, which is serious because one wrong shot would have started something definitely unsavory. But anyway, and from then on, the discussion went into the wider Indo-Pacific, because obviously the existence of natural barriers have a psychological effect on focusing your attention into areas of operation and areas you cannot operate. And considering the Indo-China Peninsula and down between Indonesia and into Australia, they almost demarcate an entire zone between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. But considering how China was formulating its plans and the way we looked at it, it's obvious China is on its own doing its own plan, probably in one room. So it doesn't have a lot of partners to coordinate in trying to look into these areas between the Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean. So as it's trying to come up with its own strategies, it was also clear, and this is before they announced the Belt and Road initiatives. But as they were going around declaring the Maritime Silk Road, going down that direction, it was clear that they were looking at these two regions as not separate, but very interconnected. So the response would be, ideally, how do we respond in kind to effectively counter it without being divided into and fragmented your forces into different areas. And so I and a few others remember the first time I wrote about the Indo-Pacific. My editor gave me a bit of a verbal hiding for disrespecting the India label or using Indo-Pacific, and I was saying like, there's nothing to do. I'm not reinventing the word. But I look back on German naval. It existed. Also, I'm from the Pacific Islands, so it was a kind of a neat thing to stitch them together. But anyway, so the Indo-Pacific concept came up to try and make an effective strategy to counter this Belt and Road and maritime encroachment strategy, which is obviously formulated into one strategy. Because one of the problems of coordinating with different partners is that if your plans are fragmented in different languages, it is probably mostly is going to fail. And so I had to do my part too and look into the Pacific. We were in India, but as my learned colleagues beforehand had said or had indicated, there's a lot of preoccupation for India around its own region, and it's almost like it's fenced in with a lot of problems. So rather than doing that, I look into the Pacific and see how relationships can be enhanced and made better. And so when I came back, I noticed that from beforehand, before I even talked to leaders or community leaders or other people, journalists from the Pacific, but the common thing, the common idea was that came out of these conversations was that a lot of the Pacific Islands see India only interested in Indians in Fiji. So do with that what you like, but if you are doing diplomacy towards the Pacific Islands, I think you might need to, when you send your vessel all the way from India to Fiji, we are right next door, and Palau is right the other side. I don't think it's gonna cost an extra leg to have a few or more stopovers before they go back all the way back to the Indian Ocean. It goes a long way, showing up and saying hi and just shake hands. Of course, like we're maritime regions, we're at the edge of the map, and almost. And if it's a flat Earth, we're probably almost falling off the Earth, the edge. But that's probably the reality for us in the region. Uh, Existential, traditional, and non-traditional threats on a daily basis. I mean, I think you guys could probably recall a few months back we had a volcanic super eruption, and we're still blown away by it. I mean, kind of metaphorically speaking, but and then a tsunami, and then like this year has been kind of crazy for us here. So after a tsunami, we had our first cases of COVID. Funny enough, brought over by Australians, and they were towed over by the Chinese ships that brought over their assistance, which is just a funny, stretch of events happening. I mean, funny to us. I mean, what can you do about it? It's a lot of humor going around. But yeah, we have to look at it also from the Pacific's perspective. To a lot of them, India doesn't care, and India is only concerned about Indians in Fiji. And if you know a little bit of Indian history or Indo-Fijian history, you could also remember that Indians and Fijians in Fiji don't necessarily get along too well, especially politically. They get along as communities, blah, blah, blah. But in terms of political upheaval, there's been a few coups in Fiji. So that message is also, the neighbors are aware of it. and I don't think they want to remain with that. They would like to see more. I was interested in going to India, and I'm sure I didn't find significant or serious culture shock when I was there. It was very pleasant, and I was in Manipal down near Mangalore. Um, but yeah, that's there was a lot of talk about the Act East policy and the Look East policy for Indian foreign policy and even defense policy. But I don't know. It's got to be a lot more serious than just talk and really reach out to countries. I mean, you're here in the region anyway, but you're just not making an extra step to make it count by like Cleo referenced the naval ship which was here a few days ago, I think, or last week. They could have stopped over in Tonga and would have been welcome very much. Anyway, the other part about the China issue for Tonga. So a little bit of history. Before I left for India, we had riots here, and our CBD got burned down by pro-democracy protesters. Also, funny enough, sponsored by our neighbors, because we were a kingdom, and our king is supposed to be to rule supreme. He appointed cabinet at the time. Actually, by that time, he appointed his cabinet from parliament when we had the riots. But the riots burned the CBD, and we had to borrow from China because nobody was stepping up with anything to replace the town that we call a capital. And we have to have a capital at some point. It's very useful to have one. And so we're indebted to China. It's minor, just 100 million US in a bigger scheme of things. But China has always been keeping every opportunity open. The other only recent development in terms of political warfare or engagement, back in 2009, our former prime minister passed away, and so a new government had to be made. But there's also one of the reasons why the appeal for China is the idea of the leadership of the global South. And as fellow developing countries, we have almost a lot of issues that can relate to us when they say it. Part of it is access to capital, and they provide that. They've been pushing Chinese banks here forever. The access to technology, and that's one of the reasons why India was almost like a preferred location, because you're the other alternative to leadership of the global South. But I just need to step up and, like they say, maybe act like it, and you might accidentally be it. But there's no animosity. In fact, there's more things in common than people realize. I mean, of course, that statement is cliche in itself, but in the 80s, we take pride when Indira Gandhi was in Tonga, because we said to ourselves that the couple of nights that she spent in Tonga, a leader with a commander-in-chief in charge of nuclear weapons was in Tonga. If anything had to go down, the command had to come from us in Tonga, because she's here. A lot of people are fond of that visit. A lot of kids are named after her. Culturally, Bollywood is, as you could expect, extremely popular, and music and culture. And there's no other way. I have actually recently proposed to the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister to opening up a High Commission in India, and to replace our current honorary consul in India. And that's still in the works. We need someone in India who's a lot more active in promoting Tonga also, if not the Pacific. And we need someone here on the ground. I mean, it had to take China. It doesn't have to be like that. That it had to take China, and that's one of the reasons why people still keep the China issue on the item. It had to take China forging a security pact with the Solomon Islands for everybody else to show up. But you're gonna just preempt that and come a day earlier and say China is following us around. Maybe not this time. They're here. They've got a full-on embassy, and it's fortified. Even the tsunami couldn't take on the fences. So yeah, they were right on the waterfront, but they were doing good. But apart from that, there's more. I think Chinese attitudes is probably common elsewhere. Exploitation, labor. When I was still a journalist, I covered a prostitution story that almost fell through the cracks. They were bringing in laborers and construction workers from China, and but also their own women to cater for these workers. Unfortunately, they kind of conned the women into working in tropical hotels in the South Pacific, but ended up being forced into prostitution. So that happens. Yeah. If you think it's this, no, it's much worse. It's this. And we're teetering on the edge. We have to manage it. We have good relationships with Japan. It goes way back, I think, into the 1800s. I think even during the Meiji period in Japan. I mentioned that because of this new changing of the guards issue. Is a perfect timing for introducing yourself into the neighborhood. But at the time, Japan and a lot of the Pacific countries were kingdoms back then. So Samoa was a kingdom, Fiji was a kingdom, and a lot of the small kingdoms in the South Pacific tried to start a pact with Japan for a pan-Pacific identity, just a maritime continent out of the Pacific, and that discussion is coming up again. They tried to do it again, which is actually the Pacific Island Forum is a product of those imaginations in trying to still remain as a region, even though they were divided by different colonial powers. The British, the French, the Americans, the Germans, the Japanese didn't go all the way out here, but sorry, yeah. Cleo, you were saying?
No, I was saying thank you very much.
Okay. If there's anything more, just feel free to ask or email me later.
Thank you, and I thank you very much for your directness and honesty, which is a byproduct of a desire for real friendship, and I think it should be taken in that way. Being clear with India about the perceptions of the region will help, is what's needed if the common solutions are to be found. As you mentioned, China sees the area as interconnected, and climate change sees the area as interconnected, and all the other challenges see it as interconnected. And if the solutions are to be interconnected, then those who are trying to find those solutions do need to be honest with each other and accept honesty from each other.
The other thing to note is
we have about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I'll do, if it's okay, is go back through the panel, and I know that people have comments to each other and in fact questions for each other. So if it's okay, what I'll do is I'll go through
Yes.
the panel in reverse order, and for kind of closing comments or questions for each other as we go back. So Mr. Motulalo, do you have a question for anybody else on the panel that we could address?
No, I'm okay for now.
Okay.
If anybody has any.
Admiral Sinha, I think you had a question or comment response.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I really don't have a question, but I just want to just make a point which you're quite right, in saying that India is not doing enough. And Mr. Tevita, you're absolutely right. Let me tell you that National Defense Academy of India, which is quite a known and good institution, known worldwide. There was a time when King of Tonga was invited there as the chief guest, and he had actually done the graduation. So that is number one. So it's not that you're too far; you're very much here. You're in our heart. But point
Okay,
what
great,
has happened?
thanks.
Yeah. Point what has happened is you will find all that happening. Prime Minister Modi has brought that Pacific Forum in his ambit now. If you can see that you've already had one meeting, the second meeting is just going to be due now. I don't know what date, but I think it's very soon. And I think the attention of the government has gone, and we have had dialogue with the Australians, and to tell them that now that we are in Quad, whatever assistance, whatever development, and whatever capability building that Australia is doing, please share with us so that we can do something else. In fact, it was not happening, and I would say that it was more by accident that we bumped into this. So I think that it will happen, and there is already a commitment of giving some assets for your the security around, at least in the coastal waters. And I am sure that with the IPMDA, which I talked about, the Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness, my suggestion is that both we got the NSA of Jennifer is here from Palau, and you are here. When you go back, just see that your what is called the coastal security setup, which is with the radars and which is with other equipment, they should get linked to the the setup that you have, which is run by the Australians from Solomon Island, because that is the one which is going to get linked and into the satellite network. And then the entire Indo-Pacific will be on one sort of board, if you like, so that people who are close by, Japan is your good friend for a whole time, as you rightly said, otherwise I would have written here. So they are close, Australia is very close, but I must admit that Australians have not done enough being your neighbor. I was in Perth about a week, 10 days back, and I mentioned this openly in a meeting. And somebody tweeted from there that Admiral Sinha is saying that you are as strong as your neighbors are, which I mean it, because we follow this, we've seen here. In spite of having everything, the see Sri Lanka, you see Pakistan going same way. Okay, understood. Pakistan, we don't have very good equation. But how about Maldives? How about Madagascar? How about Mauritius? How about Seychelles? How about Myanmar? So everywhere you find that in your own backyard, they have aced you. You don't have to have money all the time, but you have to have a support. And you're right. I will take this up, as you rightly said, that you require some chargé d'affaires or consul general or something of that sort. We'll certainly try and sort of put it to the right quarters, and let's see what happens. But my strong suggestion is get linked into the radar and coastal security surveillance network, linked it to the one in the Solomon Island, which is, or maybe you can wait for a while, because we don't know what's going to happen to this now with the Solomon Island having virtually gone to Chinese. It might just move out from there. But remain in the Pacific network. Some countries may not join, or some countries will be told to leave, I would guess. So you can't have this, lying in the platter for the China. So basically, to tell you that no, you're not far. You're very close to heart, and yours is the only king who has, His Highness has made a trip to India to graduation of some courses in National Defense Academy. There are not many. I think he's the only one, if I'm not wrong. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And of course, Prime Minister Modi was visited Fiji in 2016 and made several very important statements at the time, including visas on arrival for Pacific Islanders, for Pacific Island countries, which was very important. And MEA, I think, now has a dedicated person, I think, for the Pacific Islands, which is important development. There's an issue about awareness, but awareness is fine, but it doesn't mean much unless there's enforcement, which is, of course, something that Palau has been dealing with. But Palau has been aware of these research vessels, for example, coming into its waters, but it has no enforcement capability. So that I'm going to get to Ms. Anson at the end, but I'd also just like to point out this issue of the Solomon Islands. Currently, the Solomon Islands is not allowing naval vessels from any countries except Australia and New Zealand into its waters. So Indian naval vessels are not allowed to go into Solomon Islands waters. So counting on compromised structures that have been compromised perhaps through core policies in the past is something that may need to be reevaluated because in case of imminent crisis, which is possible, these are serious points of failure. And in that context, Commodore Vasan, would you like to give any bit of a wrap up or questions or comments to the other panelists?
Yeah, due to time constraints, I don't think I'll pose any questions. I think this is a great initiative, Cleo. I must compliment you. I think we need to have a forum, I call it track 2 or track 2.5 of all the think tanks and policymakers coming on a common grid. So, this can be the beginning where, we start talking to each other, look at issues of common concern and see what more can be. Because a lot of vital inputs have come from the speakers here today. And, we need to ensure that, instead of just being a webinar here, we take this forward with you being in the lead position, because it was thanks to you that we started this entire initiative. On some of the points that have been made earlier, there is one standard statement which we all use, which is to say that oceans connect and lands divide. So it is in that spirit that we need to come together. On the islands here, all of them have common challenges which I have already identified. The exclusive economic zone after the delimitation in 2009 will go up to 350 nautical miles. We'll have huge areas to monitor. This cannot be done on your own. In fact, just the other day, the statistics were thrown to say that in a country like Mauritius, Seychelles, and even Madagascar, their monitoring capability is something like 0.3 to 0.5% per square kilometer of ESA. So this is where we can come together to see that we'll have common means to protect our exclusive economic zone in terms of fishing, in terms of harnessing the oceans, in terms of oil and gas, and all this else which is there. So I would look at and link this, if we can, to the Sustainable Development Goals, to be specific, SDG 13. Also, the other issues of importance to all the allied nations. So I think this forum definitely can take it to the next levels by laying down the charter of what we can do at a track 2.0 as far as the island oceans are concerned, linking up the Indian Ocean islands as well as the Pacific islands, so that we have a larger pool to discuss the challenges and try and see if we can offer some solutions, and then begin the policy maker interviews. So I don't want to take too much of time, but I think these are some of the areas in which you can work together. And must compliment you personally for this great initiative of getting people together and from far off locations. And I must assure my friends here that any Indian naval visit or a Coast Guard vessel will visit you, like Cleo brought out, provided you permit us, will be there. It's because I already spent so much of fuel, time, effort to be there. So it's not a great issue for us to touch you and maybe call on the king who's there, who came to India years ago, as Admiral Shekhar mentioned. Thank you so much. Jai Hind.
Thank you very much for that. I think that that is something that would be continuing the conversation is something that would be of great value. And I can tell there are a lot of questions in the question box that we didn't get to, and so the implication is there's certainly a lot to be discussed. And just from the tone of the participants, you can see there's a desire to have open, honest, constructive conversations about how to make everybody more secure. And again, I'd like to thank Ms. Anson, who will be our last speaker on this, as somebody who's in post on the front line of trying to keep her country and by extension the region secure. So over to you, Ms. Anson.
Yeah, so I just want to reiterate the appreciation for Cleo for getting us all together to talk. I think one of the best resources that we have is communication. And a lot of times that's the biggest challenge is communication, because people don't talk to each other. So it's great that, you know, this is a forum that we can come together and talk about challenges, and we're all, you know, island people. Well, the island people and, you know, surrounded by the ocean. So we all have similar challenges. And I would like to also extend the invitation to India for their vessels to stop by in Palau just for a visit, friendly stopover. We're always welcoming our friends and our neighbors. And I hope to have more dialogue on research vessels, particularly the Chinese research vessels, because, you know, the Yuan Wang 5 that was causing all this commotion in Sri Lanka, it came into Palau's EEZ, and well, we didn't know what to do with it because this is a 220-meter vessel and our patrol boat is 40 meters. There's no way we're going to go out and try to board this thing and see what they're doing. So definitely would appreciate more communication, more dialogue, and you know, lessons learned and sharing on how we can approach these challenges to our sovereignty and our security. And then I saw a comment about US, Australia, and New Zealand's failure to take these islands in the Pacific, to take them for granted, which is true. You know, Australia and New Zealand have always had the attitude that the North Pacific is the US's responsibility. So over the years, there hasn't been a lot of engagement. Australia and New Zealand have sort of been focused on the South Pacific and Melanesia and Polynesia, and Micronesia has sort of been the US's responsibility. But the US itself has neglected, you know, these islands since the end of World War II. And it's not till recently that they've started to show interest and started to send more personnel, military exercises and all that have been vamping up, because they're noticing that, you know, they've ignored us for 37, 38 years. And now maybe it's too late because of the infiltration that's already happened from the competition. But anyway, I just want to say thank you, Cleo, for getting us all together to talk, and I hope that we can do this again.
Thank you very much, Ms. Anson, and again for fighting this fight, and hopefully soon with increasing number of allies on your side. And if the Chennai Center for China Studies, or NMF, wants to have a specific project, this issue of how to handle these research vessels, which are, Ms. Anson's very polite, I'm happy to call them spy ships, you know, what to do about them, then I think that that would be greatly appreciated. They're currently operating in an unrestricted way, and we know that they're running up and down the cables, and understanding more about what they're doing would also be very helpful for figuring out how to protect against them. One small example among the many challenges that working together could serve better. And in that spirit, I'd like very much to thank Commodore Vasan and his incredible team at the Chennai Center for China Studies and NMF, and Tevita Motulalo from Tonga and the Royal Oceania Institute, Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha, for his honesty, openness, and willingness to help solve these problems, and to Ms. Jen Anson. And I noticed in the comments, Dr. Hayakawa is here. She's the reason I know Ms. Anson to begin with, and is another member of the team from Japan, based out of one of the southern countries, who's been working hard to try to keep the region as secure as possible. And that's how we're going to do it. We're going to do it all together. So I'm not going to say goodbye. I'm going to say see you until next time. And thank you very much.
Thank you all. Lovely having you with us.
Thank you, Cleo.
Thank you all very, very much. And I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next, especially on the research vessel issue. Thank you. And
Hello. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hello, Tevita.